What if I told you that one of the most popular historical dramas on television actually toned things down? That the real story behind the Jacobite Rising of 1745 was so messy, so full of betrayal, delusion, and gut-wrenching brutality that even Outlander, a show known for not pulling its punches, couldn't fully go there? Because that's exactly what happened. The real Bonnie Prince Charlie wasn't the dashing, slightly frustrating prince you see on screen. He was worse. The real betrayals cut deeper. And the aftermath of the Battle of Culloden wasn't just a tragedy. It was a calculated cultural genocide that nearly wiped an entire way of life off the map. So today we're peeling back the fiction to get to the truth. And trust me, the truth is somehow more dramatic than anything Diana Gabaldon could have written. Let's start with the man himself. Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie. In Outlander, he's portrayed as charismatic but dangerously naive, a young prince who genuinely believes he's destined to reclaim the British throne for the Stuart line. And while that's not entirely wrong, the show actually gives him more grace than he deserves. The real Charles Edward Stuart landed on the shores of Scotland in July 1745 with exactly 7 companions. 7. He had almost no money, no significant military backing from France, despite months of begging, and a plan that essentially amounted to show up and hope for the best. Most of the Highland clan chiefs who met him initially told him to go home. Cameron of Lochiel, one of the most powerful chiefs in the Highlands, reportedly told Charles he was mad. But Charles didn't listen. He was stubborn to the point of recklessness, and he had an almost pathological inability to accept advice from people who actually knew what they were doing. Here's what Outlander softens considerably. Charles wasn't just naive, he was vain, he was paranoid. He played his own advisors against each other constantly. He surrounded himself with Irish and French favourites and openly distrusted the very Highland chiefs who were risking everything for his cause. Lord George Murray, who was arguably the most competent military mind in the Jacobite army, was constantly undermined by Charles and his inner circle. Murray would devise brilliant strategies, and Charles would override them on a whim, or based on the advice of sycophants who told him what he wanted to hear. The show hints at this tension, but in reality it was far more toxic. Murray and Charles despised each other by the end, and many historians believe that this personal conflict directly contributed to the disaster at Culloden. And about that charm everyone talks about. Yes, Charles could turn it on when he needed to. But he was also a heavy drinker, even before the Rising failed. Contemporary accounts describe him showing up to war councils intoxicated. After the defeat, his alcoholism consumed him entirely, but even during the campaign itself, there were warning signs that the romantic prince of legend was a deeply flawed and self-destructive man. Now, here's where the real history gets genuinely incredible, and where Outlander actually undersells what happened. The early Jacobite campaign was shockingly successful. Charles raised his standard at Glenfinnan in August 1745, and within a month he had taken Edinburgh. Not through some brutal siege, he essentially walked in. The city fell almost without a fight. Then came the Battle of Prestonpans, where the Jacobite army destroyed a government force in less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The Highland Charge, that terrifying wave of screaming clansmen with broadswords and targes, was so effective and so fast that seasoned British soldiers simply broke and ran. This is where Charles's delusion became truly dangerous, because after Prestonpans, he was convinced he was invincible. He genuinely believed that if he marched into England, the English Jacobites would rise up to join him, and the French would finally send their armies. Neither of those things happened. The march south reached as far as Derby, just 125 miles from London. And yes, there was genuine panic in London. King George II allegedly had his bags packed and a ship on standby, but the English Jacobites never materialized in any meaningful numbers. The French support remained a phantom, and Charles's own council, led by Lord George Murray, practically begged him to turn back. Charles was furious. He saw the retreat from Derby as a personal betrayal, and he never forgave Murray or the chiefs who supported the decision. But here's the thing. They were right. The Jacobite army was outnumbered, deep in hostile territory, with multiple government armies closing in. Continuing south would have been suicide. The retreat was the only rational choice, and Charles treated it as treason. From that point forward, the campaign was poisoned by resentment and mistrust at the very top. And then came Culloden, April 16, 1746. Outlander depicts this battle as a nightmare, and it is one of the show's most powerful sequences. But the reality was even worse than what appeared on screen. The Jacobite army was exhausted, starving, and depleted. Many soldiers hadn't eaten in days. The night before the battle, Charles ordered a disastrous night march intended to surprise the government camp. The march failed completely. The men stumbled through bogs in the dark, never reached their target, and had to turn back. By the time they formed up on Culloden Moor the next morning, many had simply collapsed from exhaustion. Some were literally sleeping on the battlefield when the fighting began. Charles chose the ground, and it was a catastrophic decision. Culloden Moor was flat, open, and boggy. It was perfect terrain for the Duke of Cumberland's artillery and disciplined infantry, and absolutely the worst possible ground for a Highland charge. Lord George Murray argued vehemently for a different position. Charles ignored him. The battle lasted less than an hour. Some accounts say the main fighting was over in under 40 minutes. Government artillery tore through the Jacobite lines before they could even reach the enemy. When the Highland charge finally came, it was disorganized and piecemeal. Some clans charged too early, others never charged at all. The government troops had been drilled in a new bayonet technique specifically designed to counter the Highland charge, and it worked devastatingly. Between 1,500 and 2,000 Jacobites were killed or wounded in those terrible minutes. But here's what Outlander only touches on. The killing didn't stop when the battle ended. Cumberland gave orders that no quarter be given. Wounded Jacobites were bayoneted where they lay. Government soldiers swept the battlefield for hours afterward, finishing off anyone still alive. Nearby barns where wounded men had crawled for shelter were locked and set on fire. This wasn't the fog of war, these were deliberate orders. Cumberland earned his nickname the Butcher that day, and he wore it comfortably. What followed Culloden is where the real history becomes almost unbearable, and where Outlander, despite its best efforts, can only scratch the surface. The British government didn't just defeat the Jacobites. They set out to destroy Highland culture entirely. The Act of Proscription banned the wearing of tartan and Highland dress. Playing the bagpipes was outlawed, classified as an instrument of war. The carrying of weapons was prohibited. The traditional power of the clan chiefs was systematically dismantled. The Heritable Jurisdictions Act stripped chiefs of their legal authority over their people, breaking a social system that had existed for centuries. But the laws were only part of it. Government troops rampaged through the Highlands for months after Culloden, burning homes, destroying crops, and confiscating cattle, which was the primary wealth of Highland communities. Entire communities were left to starve. Women were assaulted. Men were executed without trial or transported to the colonies as forced laborers. The cleared estates were handed to loyalist landlords who had no connection to the people living on them, setting the stage for the Highland clearances that would come later and complete the destruction. Bonnie Prince Charlie himself, he fled. For 5 months he was a fugitive in the Highlands and Islands, hunted by thousands of soldiers with a £30,000 bounty on his head. And despite the unimaginable suffering his failed rising had brought upon these people, not a single Highlander betrayed him. That fact alone tells you something profound about the loyalty he inspired and absolutely did not deserve. He eventually escaped to France, where he spent the remaining decades of his life drinking himself into oblivion, abusing his wife, and clinging to a cause that was long dead. He died in Rome in 1788, bloated, bitter, and largely forgotten. There was no redemption arc, there was no dignity in his end. So why does this matter? Why compare a television drama to the real history? Because Outlander did something genuinely important. It made millions of people care about a chapter of history that had been largely forgotten outside of Scotland. It brought the Jacobite rising into living rooms around the world and made viewers feel the weight of what was lost. Yes, the show romanticizes certain elements. Yes, it gives Charles more complexity than he perhaps deserves and softens some of the worst horrors of the aftermath. But it also treats this history with a seriousness and emotional honesty that most popular media never attempts. The real story, though, deserves to be known in its full, unvarnished truth. Because the real Highlanders who fought and died at Culloden weren't characters in a romance. They were people who believed in something, were led by a man unworthy of their sacrifice, and were punished with a ferocity that should shock us even now. The destruction of Highland culture after Culloden is one of the great tragedies of European history, and it doesn't get nearly enough attention. If this video made you see the Jacobite rising differently, or if it made you want to dig deeper into the real history behind Outlander, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find videos like this. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the true stories behind your favorite shows and films, because I promise you, reality is almost always stranger and more powerful than fiction. And drop a comment below telling me what surprised you most about the real history. Was it Charles's behavior? The horror after Culloden? The fact that no one ever turned him in despite everything? I want to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.